The information that I have on the US Energy Department data states that the fuel rods and the radioactivity is equivalent to roughly 85 times the amount of cesium-137 released at the Chernobyl incident.
You have to understand that the Chernobyl incident, this is a major one. There was one reactor and they had it relatively in control in 2 weeks. In Japan, you have multiple nuclear reactors that have melted down. They haven't been brought under control. It's been going for over 13 months now. During this period of time, those reactors have been releasing enormous amounts of radiation, including cesium, plus all the fuel pools that have been damaged and are open to the atmosphere have also been doing that. So you just don't have 3 reactor cores that are releasing radiation. You have literally tens of reactor cores releasing radiation. Now, the Japanese have around 54 nuclear reactors. After this disaster, they started to shut them down. At the present time, I think they've only got 1 nuclear reactor working. So it's been a real shock to their system. They've pretty well, at this stage, shut down every nuclear reactor in the country. But this still has not stopped the disaster. The disaster is ongoing. They need technology, which we don't have right now, to deal with it.
We're in a gridlock where, in actual fact, we need to have this discussion. It has to be out there in the public domain, and we need to be empowering our leaders to get our top scientists and anybody else to assist the government of Japan, and if it means forcing ourselves nearly onto the picture, we've got to find a way to negotiate our way in, of course, but this is serious.
What's happening in Japan is affecting the whole world. I mean, all the radioactive detections by myself and others just in the southern hemisphere, and the numerous ones in the northern hemisphere indicate that something major is happening, and we're not being told the truth. We also have now this former ambassador breaking ranks and saying this is a world-changing, serious event. It's going to affect everyone. We need help. We should be calling upon the entire international community to help us. Forget about our pride and saving face. We have no choice. So you've got, at the present time, spent fuel pool 4 sitting 30 metres, 100 feet above the ground, and a building that's been heavily damaged by an explosion. It's got cracks and leaks, and the only thing keeping it up at present are these steel rods that they put in to reinforce and hold it up. But you have to understand the enormous amounts of weights of the fuel pools and the water in the fuel pool, and how that can easily be destroyed by a major earthquake nearby. Now, around the 14th or 15th of this month, April, they had 20 earthquakes centered around Fukushima in 24 hours. The largest one was about 5.9. But even that stopped their cooling system from working, and at one stage they were losing cooling systems within that reactor core spent fuel pool, and it wasn't looking very good. But if they get a major earthquake of significance, 7 or above, the whole thing could topple. If that happens, we then have a situation that is far more dangerous than it is now, and there may be no way people can actually get in there and get control of it. I'd like to emphasise that it hasn't fallen yet, but we certainly need an international effort to get control of the situation. Like you say, we need all those bright minds to get in there and brainstorm solutions to all the problems they're facing at Fukushima.
At Chernobyl, of course, there were many courageous people there who threw their life on the line, and they had helicopters come over and entomb Chernobyl by dropping cement from these helicopters to lock it all down. And of course, the helicopter people all lost their lives. And the only difficulty, of course, is Fukushima is so close to the water, to the ocean, it's nearly impossible to do all this, because even when they endeavour to entomb the cooling towers, the water's going to splash over and it's going to be all over the place. It's a dreadful situation.
The thing to understand is with Fukushima, the Fukushima reactors are spread over a much larger area. And you also have the situation where the buildings are completely blown apart and the blobs of molten core material have melted down through the concrete. They don't actually know where these molten blobs of highly reactive material from the cores are. They can't get close enough to find out. So they're like radioactive volcanoes continually releasing enormous amounts of radioactivity into the atmosphere. Now just be aware, there are a lot of very brave Japanese men who've risked their lives and probably died dealing with this disaster. This just hasn't been publicised. A lot of people jump up and say, oh, well, no one's died at Fukushima. That is total nonsense. I've seen a letter, which is correspondence, an email between the NRC and the Japanese. It's been posted on the internet. That clearly states within the first day or so that the Japanese reported that 5 workers had been exposed to lethal doses of radiation. Also, a lot of people have looked at the death statistics in North America and Japan, and they estimate that approximately up to 54,000 Americans have died as a result of Fukushima, and up to 44,000 Japanese. So what they're doing is looking at the old statistical records of deaths and expected death rates before Fukushima and then after Fukushima. The thing with radiation is, if someone dies from it, how do you prove it? And this is one of the things with any of these disasters. They will say that the death wasn't because of the radiation. You can look at that, Chernobyl. If you go up to Wikipedia and look up deaths there from Chernobyl, you'll say, oh, so they estimate up to 33,000. But if you look at the research done by the actual Russians, and that research has recently been translated into English, they estimate over the last 25 years close to 1 million people, men, women and children, have died as a result of Chernobyl. So this is the thing you face with. Whenever you get people in the industry talking, they always play it down. They're like people in the tobacco industry. They will always play down the hazards relating to their industry. If you get independent researchers who have the community interest at heart, they tell the truth. So when I'm doing research, I always look for independent researchers who have no vested interest in an industry, whether it's successful or not. They're only interested in what effect it has on the community. And they report truthfully what their findings are.
Peter, we come from nuclear-free New Zealand, and it was a great battle to get over 100 local areas to become nuclear-free, which then gave the government a mandate to bring about a nuclear-free country because they realised that New Zealanders wanted that.
Well, unfortunately, if you've got countries all over the world that have got nuclear reactors and they can go into meltdown, no one eventually is nuclear-free. We actually have to have a worldwide movement to shut down all the nuclear reactors. A lot of people don't realise how many nuclear reactors there are in the world. There are actually about 442 nuclear reactors for generating electricity. There's another 250 around the world for research purposes. And the rest, up to around 1,000, are military. So you've got 442 for generating electricity, 250 for research reactors, and the rest, up to 1,000, are all military. Now, Japan has 54 nuclear reactors. So all these plants are built in a highly seismically active zone, which is just crazy. So the thing to understand is that really you can have a nuclear-free country, which is great, but if your neighbour has nuclear reactors and an accident happens, you're no longer nuclear-free. It can affect you. It can affect your children, and it can affect generations to come. And this is what we're seeing in Fukushima, in Japan. Look how far Japan is from Canada, Alaska, and North America. And yet the radioactivity from there has seriously affected the west coast of America, Canada and Alaska and the people living there.
And of course there's the animals. And it's really interesting because from Caloundra you have godwits that fly up to Japan, into Siberia and Alaska, and also in New Zealand. They also fly from Alaska for 5 days, 5 to 7 days, non-stop down to New Zealand. Now, these godwits are in many ways now the canaries in the coal mine, aren't they?
Well, a lot of these migratory animals, whether they be bird, fish or animal, are being affected by the radioactivity fallout that's in the atmosphere but also in the ocean. So a lot of fish, migratory fish, are swimming through the highly contaminated zones of the Pacific Ocean and migrating to different other areas as well. I mean, there are reports. My suggestion is that for your family's health and well-being, we all collectively need to collectively demand that the air, food, water and goods be tested that are coming from contaminated areas. If we don't demand it, it won't happen. So we have to get our governments to do the testing. One of the things you have to understand is that to detect some of this radioactive material in food and water, etc., you need highly sophisticated instrumentation and the skills to use it. We really need governments to start doing that. But that hasn't been happening because the governments won't admit there's anything really seriously happening here. So my suggestion is do research. Find out what are the most contaminated areas. Make sure you do not purchase food from those areas. Buy food that's local, that's grown local. Educate the family that that's what they should be doing. And when it comes to travel, I suggest you restrict all your travel at the present time to the Southern Hemisphere. Research dietary systems that can help remove and protect your body and your family from radioactive contamination. There's lots of dietary supplements and things you can take that will help remove heavy metal contamination from the system. And a lot of these radioactive isotopes are heavy metals.
I don't want to say very good, Peter. All I can say is thank you very much for sharing. You have been very lucid, and I feel that you have conveyed a very, very clear message that needs to be adhered to, that listeners need to say, right, I've got to commit myself now to taking care of myself, my family and my community, and also enabling our government to be far more involved, because as a nuclear-free country, New Zealand has been really, really complacent over the last so many years, and it's time for us to be really, really serious if we love our children and our grandchildren, and we need to move now.
I agree. Everyone has to become proactive. You've got to get out there and do your research. Educate yourself about radiation and how it affects the environment and the human biological system. Learn about remedial things you can do to protect your family, including food and dietary systems you can put in place to help remove contamination from the body. And remember, avoid buying and purchasing food from radioactive contaminated areas. And that could be a bit of a moving target. So you've got to get out there and stay on top of it and do your research and find websites that keep you up to date.
Peter, thank you very much for sharing with us here in New Zealand, and I trust elsewhere that people will get motivated now to recognise that we are on this planet, we are all one humanity, and we cannot run away from this. We have to face it and get stuck in.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tim, for inviting me on your radio program. It's very appreciated.
Excellent, Pete. Thank you so much. That was Peter Daly from Caloundra in Australia talking about the radiation spike that he first noticed on the 8th of January 2012, and then what cascaded into something far greater to make us really become aware that we have